The desert air shimmered over Nelly's Air Force Base as the sun bled orange across the tarmac. Squadron Commander Hayes stood in the briefing room, arms crossed, watching the newest addition to Red Flag 25 to walk through the door. Captain Myra, Vagrant, Cress moved with the kind of quiet precision that came from years of flying missions nobody wanted to talk about. Her flight suit bore patches from 3 different conflicts, but the room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Someone in the back row coughed. Hayes had seen this before, the sideways glances, the crossed arms, the subtle shift in posture when a female pilot entered a space dominated by egos and afterburners. What made it worse was Vagrant's age. At 38, she was considered past her prime in a field where most fighter jocks peaked in their early 30s. The murmurs started immediately. "They really scraping the bottom of the barrel now," muttered Captain Torch Brennan, a hotshot F-35 pilot with more confidence than combat hours. His wingman snickered. Vagrant didn't react. She'd heard it all before, in Iraq, in Syria, in classified operations where her presence had saved lives but earned no headlines. She took her seat in the third row alone, her hands folded calmly on the desk. Hayes began the briefing with the standard red flag overview. 2 weeks of intensive air combat training. Blue Force versus Red Force. The most realistic combat scenario short of actual war. He clicked through slides showing the exercise boundaries, threat arrays, and objectives. Then he paused. This year's Red Force Aggressor Squadron will be led by a pilot many of you know by reputation. The screen changed. A grainy photograph appeared, and Su-57 Felon painted in experimental camouflage banked hard against a Syrian sky. Codename Spectre, former Russian VKS, now a contractor, he's never lost an engagement. The room tensed. Spectre was a ghost story among fighter pilots, a name whispered in ready rooms from Lakenheath to Kadena, undefeated, unpredictable, untouchable. Hayes continued. Blue Force composition is as follows. He listed the squadrons: F-22 Raptors, F-35 Lightning IIs, F-15 Eagles, and one slot that made several pilots exchange confused looks. Flying as Blue Force Tactical Reserve, Captain Cress in an F-16C Block 50. The room erupted in barely concealed laughter. An F-16. Against fifth-generation fighters and an Su-57 flown by a living legend. It was a joke, a publicity stunt. Deadweight. Torch leaned toward his wingman. "Guess they need someone to get shot down first. Might as well be Grandma Vagrant." The laughter spread. Vagrant's jaw tightened, but her eyes remained fixed on the screen. Hayes glanced at her, then back at the room. "Dismissed. Flights begin at 0600. As the pilots filed out, Vagrant remained seated, staring at the frozen image of Spectre's Su-57. She knew that aircraft. She knew that pilot. And she knew something nobody else in that room did. This wasn't going to be an exercise. This was going to be a reckoning. The pre-dawn chill bit through flight suits as the pilots gathered on the flight line. Maintenance crews swarmed the jets like ants, checking weapon pylons, fuel lines, and avionics. The F-22s gleamed under the floodlights, their radar-absorbent coating making them look like predators carved from shadow. The F-35 sat squat and lethal, their sensor arrays capable of seeing threats 100 miles away. Then there was Vagrant's F-16, older, lighter, stripped down to essentials. Torch walked past it, shaking his head. "That thing belongs in a museum." His wingman laughed. Vagrant was already in her cockpit, running through her pre-flight checklist with methodical precision. Her hands moved across switches and dials without hesitation. She'd flown this airframe, tail number 417, for 6 years across 3 theaters. It wasn't the newest jet, but it was hers. She knew every rattle, every quirk, every ounce of performance she could coax from its General Electric engine. The tower frequency crackled to life. "Blue Force, this is Overlord. Red Force is airborne. Exercise boundaries are active. Rules of engagement are as briefed. Time on target 12 minutes. Vagrant's heart rate didn't change. She toggled her radio. "Overlord Vagrant, request tactical frequency." A pause. Vagrant, switch tactical common. Slot in trail formation. Trail formation. Dead last. the position reserved for inexperienced pilots or those expected to contribute nothing. Vagrant switched frequencies and heard the chatter immediately. Torch's voice dominated the channel. "All right, boys, let's make this quick. Raptors take high CAP, Eagles sweep middle. We'll handle the merge. Vagrant, just stay out of the way." She didn't respond. Her F-16 lifted off smoothly, gear retracting with a hydraulic thump. She banked north, following the formation at a distance. Below, the Nevada desert stretched endless and empty. Above, the sky was turning from black to deep blue. The exercise area was a massive block of airspace over the ranges, mountains, dry lakes, and simulated threat emplacements. Intelligence had placed Spectre's Su-57 somewhere in the northern corridor, accompanied by 4 F-16s painted in red Force aggressor colors. The plan was simple. Blue Force would sweep in, establish air superiority, and eliminate the aggressor aircraft. Standard tactics, overwhelming force. The problem was Spectre didn't fight standard. 10 minutes into the flight, the first data link contact appeared on Vagrant's display. 4 bogies, medium altitude, heading south. The F-22s moved to intercept. Radio discipline collapsed immediately. Raptor lead has contact, spiking now. Fox 3, simulated AMRAAM missiles streaked through the sky. Then came the voice that changed everything. "Blue Force, this is Overlord." Splash 4 red Force aggressors, confirm. A pause, then from the Raptor lead, negative splash, say again, negative splash, contacts are breaking formation, they're scattering. The radio exploded with confusion. "Where'd they go? I've got nothing on radar." "Data link is glitching." Then silence. Not radio silence, actual silence. Every Blue Force radar screen went dark simultaneously. Electronic warfare. Spectre had just blinded them. The chaos unfolded in seconds. Blue Force, stripped of radar and data link, reverted to visual scanning in an environment where visual range meant death. The F-22s climbed, trying to re-establish situational awareness. The F-35s descended, relying on their electro-optical systems. The F-15 spread wide, hopping to flush out the aggressors through sheer coverage. Vagrant banked east, away from the formation. Her radar was dark like everyone else's, but she'd flown in electronic warfare environments before. She switched her targeting pod to infrared and scanned the horizon manually. The sky was empty, too empty. Then she saw it, a flicker of heat distortion at her 11 o'clock low altitude, not an aircraft. A missile contrail already fatting. She keyed her radio. "Blue Force, Vagrant. Missile launch detected, bearing 290 low altitude. Recommend defensive posture. Static." Her transmission was being jammed. She was alone. The F-22s didn't see the Su-57 until it was already among them. Spectre had used the terrain, skimming the mountain ridges at 500 feet, completely masked from their high-altitude search. When he popped up, he was inside their engagement envelope. The first Raptor died to a simulated R-77 missile at 12 miles. The second tried to merge, but Spectre's thrust-vectoring nozzles allowed him to pull angles that defied physics. The Raptor overshot, another simulated kill. The radio came back online in fragments. "Breaking left, where is he?" "Raptor 3 is Winchester, RTB." Vagrant listened to the massacre unfold. Spectre wasn't just winning. He was dismantling them. She adjusted her altitude, dropping to 300 feet, using the terrain the same way he was. Her airspeed climbed 400 knots, then 500. The F-16 rattled but held steady. She wasn't hunting Spectre yet, she was studying him. Every pilot had patterns, tells. Spectre's tell was aggression. He never stayed defensive. He pushed relentlessly until his opponent made a mistake. The key was not giving him a mistake to exploit. Another radio call. "All Blue Force, RTB. Exercise terminated. Repeat, RTB." Vagrant ignored it. She banked hard north toward the last known position of the Su-57. Her infrared pod picked up a heat signature, twin engines, high thrust. There. Spectre was egressing north alone, his aggressors either splashed or withdrawn. He thought the exercise was over. Vagrant armed her training missile. The tone was weak, but it was there. She had one chance. She lit her afterburner and dove. The F-16 screamed toward the deck, her wings slicing through the dry desert air. Spectre's Su-57 was 5 miles ahead, still flying level, confident. Vagrant closed to 3 miles. Her missile tone sharpened. 2 miles. Her finger hovered over the trigger. Then Spectre's radar came online. He'd been baiting her. The Su-57 snapped into a vertical climb, thrust vectoring nozzles flaring. Vagrant followed, pulling 9 GS, her vision narrowing. The two aircraft clawed toward the sun, contrails spiraling behind them. This wasn't an exercise anymore. The merge was brutal. Spectre's Su-57 rolled inverted at the top of the climb, diving back toward Vagrant with the sun directly behind him. Classic energy trap. He expected her to panic, to break away and bleed speed. Instead, Vagrant cut her throttle and deployed her speed brakes. The F-16 decelerated violently, dropping like a stone. Spectre overshot, his Su-57 screaming past her canopy at less than 500 feet separation. She saw his helmet turn, tracking her. For one heartbeat, their eyes met through layers of titanium and plexiglass. Then she lit her afterburner again. The tables had turned. Now she was behind him. Her missile tone screamed in her headset, solid lock. Fox 2, she called, simulating a Sidewinder launch. The training system registered the shot. Spectre's aircraft lit up with simulated damage indicators, but he didn't break off. Instead, he dove toward a canyon system, using the terrain to mask his escape. Vagrant followed, her F-16 hugging the jagged rocks. The canyon was narrow, barely wide enough for one aircraft, let alone two. The walls blurred past at 600 knots. Spectre banked hard left, then right, then pulled vertical through a gap in the canyon wall. Vagrant followed every move, matching him turn for turn. Her hands were steady on the stick, her breathing controlled. This was what she'd been trained for, close-range knife fights where milliseconds and instinct decided survival. Spectre tried a scissors maneuver, bleeding speed to force an overshoot. Vagrant anticipated it, deploying her speed brakes again and rolling perpendicular. She kept her nose pointed at him, maintaining offensive position. He was good, better than good, but she was patient. The canyon opened into a wide basin. Spectre pulled into another vertical climb, trying to regain the energy advantage. Vagrant didn't follow this time. Instead, she broke hard left, using the terrain to mask her position. She went dark, shutting down her radar, her transponder, everything. She became a ghost. Spectre circled above, searching. His radar swept the basin, finding nothing. Vagrant waited, hidden in the radar shadow of a mesa. She watched him on her infrared pod. He was getting frustrated, flying predictable search patterns. Finally, he descended, trying to flush her out. That's when she struck. She popped up from behind the mesa, already in firing position. Her tone was immediate, solid. Fox 2, another hit. The training system registered catastrophic damage. The Su-57 was technically dead. Spectre's voice came over the emergency frequency, accent thick but clear. "Who is this?" Vagrant didn't answer. She banked away, heading back toward Nellie's. Behind her, the Su-57 climbed slowly, Spectre no doubt replaying the engagement in his mind. When Vagrant landed, the flight line was silent. Every pilot had been watching the datalink replay. Hayes stood by her aircraft as she climbed down. "That was some flying, Captain." She pulled off her helmet, sweat streaking her face. "Just doing my job, sir." The debriefing room was packed. Every pilot from Blue Force sat in silence as the engagement footage played on the main screen. Vagrant's F-16, small and nimble, dancing through the canyon system. The two simulated kills on Spectre's Su-57. The final escape through the mesa shadow. It was textbook aggressor tactics, executed with surgical precision. Hayes paused the footage. Captain Kress flew this engagement alone, with no radar, no datalink, and against an opponent who had already eliminated 6 Blue Force aircraft. He let that sink in. She scored 2 simulated kills on a pilot who has never been defeated in an exercise. Torch sat in the front row, his face unreadable. His earlier bravado had evaporated. Vagrant stood at the side of the room, hands behind her back. Hayes turned to her. "Walk us through your decision-making." She stepped forward, her voice calm and measured. Spectre's tactics rely on overwhelming initial aggression and electronic warfare. He blinds his opponents, forces mistakes, then exploits them. The key is not engaging on his terms. She clicked through the footage. When Blue Force lost radar, everyone climbed, trying to reestablish awareness. That's predictable. I went low, used the terrain, and waited for him to reveal himself. And the canyon engagement? Hayes asked. He's flying a fifth-generation fighter with thrust vectoring and superior energy management. In a turning fight at altitude, he wins. But in the canyon, his advantages become liabilities. The Su-57 is larger, less maneuverable in confined spaces. I forced him into an environment where skill mattered more than technology. One of the F-22 pilots raised his hand. You shut down all your systems. That's a massive risk. What if you'd lost track of him? Vagrant met his eyes. I didn't lose track of him. I used passive infrared and visual references. Sometimes the best sensor is your own eyes. The room absorbed that. Hayes nodded slowly. Spectre requested a debrief with Captain Kress. He wants to know who shot him down. A ripple of surprise. Spectre never requested debriefs. He usually just disappeared after exercises, leaving destroyed egos and shattered tactics in his wake. Vagrant's expression didn't change. I'll meet with him. That evening, in a secure conference room away from the main briefing area, Vagrant sat across from Spectre. He was older than she expected, maybe mid-50s, with gray threading through his dark hair. His flight suit bore no identifying patches. "You have flown against me before," he said without preamble. It wasn't a question. Vagrant nodded. "Syria, 2019. You were flying contract work for a paramilitary group. I was running close air support for a coalition convoy." Spectre's eyes narrowed. "The convoy that disappeared." "It didn't disappear, it evaded. I drew you away from them." He leaned back, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Vagrant, I remember now. You flew through a missile envelope that should have killed you. 3 SAMs, you defeated all 3. I got lucky." "No," his smile faded. "Luck is for amateurs. You are not amateur. Today in Canyon, you flew like someone who has nothing to lose and everything to prove." "Why?" Vagrant considered the question. Outside the window, the sun was setting again, painting the desert in shades of amber and rust. She thought about the years of dismissive comments, the assignments passed over, the evaluations that praised her skill but questioned her place. "Because every time I step into a cockpit, I have to be twice as good to be considered half as competent," she said finally. "That's the reality. So I became twice as good." Spectre nodded slowly. "In my country, we had similar problems, not with women but with anyone who did not fit the mold. I was farmer's son. They said I was too poor, too uneducated, so I outflew them all." He stood, extending his hand. "You have earned my respect, Vagrant. That is rare." She shook his hand. His grip was firm but not aggressive. "Will you be back for the next red flag?" he asked. "If they invite me." "They will, because now everyone knows what I know. You are not Deadweight. You are weapon." After he left, Vagrant sat alone in the conference room. The weight of the day settled on her shoulders. She'd proven herself again, but the exhaustion was real. How many times would she have to prove it before it became assumed? Her phone buzzed. A text from Hayes. "Press wants an interview. Interested." She stared at the message. Publicity was a double-edged sword. It could elevate her, make her an example for future pilots. But it could also paint a target, invite more scrutiny, more challenges. She typed back, "No interview, let the flying speak." Hayes responded immediately. "Understood, but for what it's worth, you changed minds today, including mine." Vagrant pocketed her phone and walked out onto the flight line. Her F-16 sat under the stars, maintenance crews finishing their post-flight inspections. Tail number 417. She ran her hand along the fuselage, feeling the rivets and panel seams. This jet had carried her through 3 wars, dozens of close calls, and now a training exercise that had become something more. "Ma'am," one of the crew chiefs approached, a young airman with grease-stained hands. "We're finishing up. She's good to go for tomorrow's sortie." "Thank you, airman." "Ma'am, if I can say, what you did today was incredible. My sister's applying to the academy. She wants to fly fighters. Can I tell her about you?" Vagrant smiled, a rare, genuine smile. "Tell her it's not easy. Tell her she'll have to work harder than everyone around her, but tell her it's worth it." The airman nodded enthusiastically and returned to his work. Vagrant looked up at the stars, the same stars she'd navigated by in Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. The sky didn't care about gender, politics, or prejudice. It only cared about skill, and she had plenty of that. The second day of Red Flag began with a different energy. The mockery had vanished, replaced by cautious respect. Pilots who'd ignored Vagrant the day before now nodded as she passed. Torch approached her during the morning briefing, his earlier arrogance tempered. "Vagrant," he said, voice low, "I owe you an apology. What I said yesterday was out of line." She studied him for a moment. His jaw was tight, his pride clearly wounded, but the apology seemed genuine. Apology accepted. "Don't let it happen again." He nodded and returned to his seat. Hayes began the briefing with updated objectives. Today's scenario involves a contested air environment with multiple surface-to-air threats and a numerically superior Red Force. Blue Force objective is to establish air superiority and clear a corridor for strike packages. He clicked to the next slide. "Vagrant, you'll be flying as tactical lead for the second wave." The room went silent. Tactical lead. Not trail, not deadweight. A position of actual responsibility. Torch glanced back at her, something like grudging admiration in his eyes. Hayes continued. "Spectre will be flying again along with 6 aggressor aircraft. Intelligence suggests he'll employ similar electronic warfare tactics. Plan accordingly." After the briefing, the pilots gathered around Vagrant, peppering her with questions. "How did you track him without radar? What's the best counter to thrust vectoring? Can you teach that canyon maneuver?" She answered each question patiently, sharing techniques she'd learned through years of hard experience. It was strange being listened to, being valued. The flight line was busier today. Maintenance crews worked double time, ensuring every aircraft was mission-ready. Vagrant's F-16 had been given extra attention, fresh paint on the nose, all systems triple-checked. The crew chief gave her a thumbs-up as she approached. "She's ready for whatever you need, ma'am." Vagrant strapped in, the familiar routine calming her nerves. Pre-flight checks, radio checks, weapons systems initialization. Everything was green. The tower frequency crackled. "Blue Force Overlord. Red Force is airborne. Exercise is live. Good hunting." Vagrant's flight launched in elements. 2 F-22s, 4 F-15s, and her F-16 leading a pair of F-35s. The formation flew north, spread across 30 miles of airspace. The data link showed Red Force contacts clustering near the northern SAM belt. Spectre was there, somewhere, waiting. Vagrant keyed her radio. "Blue Force, Vagrant. Expect electronic warfare at initial contact. Maintain visual separation and be ready to go manual." Acknowledgements came back, professional and crisp. She'd earned their trust. Now she had to keep it. The first SAM radar lit up at 50 miles, a simulated S-400 system with range enough to threaten the entire formation. The F-22s fired simulated harm missiles, suppressing the sight. Then the radars went dark, all of them. Electronic warfare again, but this time Blue Force was ready. Vagrant switched to infrared, scanning the horizon. The F-35s did the same, their advanced sensors cutting through the jamming. Vagrant, Lightning 3. "I have multiple contacts, low altitude, bearing 315. Copy. All aircraft descend to medium altitude. Raptors maintain high cover." The formation descended, maintaining loose formation. Vagrant's targeting pod picked up heat signatures, 4 aircraft, probably the aggressor F-16s, but no Su-57. Spectre was hiding again. Vagrant's instinct screamed warning. The aggressor F-16s were too obvious, too exposed. They were bait. "All aircraft hold fire. Those contacts are a diversion." Vagrant Raptor lead. "If they're bait, where's the trap?" "Above us. Spectre's using the sun again. Raptors, check your 6 high." There was a pause then. Vagrant Raptor lead has contact. Single bogey, high aspect, 40,000 feet. Spectre had climbed above them, using altitude and the sun to mask his approach. Now he dove, building speed for a single devastating attack run. But this time Vagrant was ready. "Raptors extend north. Lightning flight with me. We're taking him head-on." The 2 F-35s tucked in close as Vagrant lit her afterburner. The 3 aircraft accelerated toward the diving Su-57, a game of chicken at supersonic speeds. Spectre didn't flinch. His aircraft kept coming, nose pointed directly at them. At 10 miles, Vagrant called. "Lightning flight, brake left and right on my mark. 3, 2, 1, brake." The F-35 split, one left, one right. Vagrant pulled straight up directly into Spectre's flight path. The Su-57 had to choose, follow Vagrant and expose his belly to the F-35s or engage the F-35s and lose track of Vagrant. He chose Vagrant. The Su-57 rolled inverted and pulled hard, following her into the vertical. But the F-35s were already maneuvering, their weapons systems locked on. Lightning 3, Fox 3. Lightning 4, Fox 3. Two simulated AMRAAMs streaked toward the Su-57. Spectre's electronic warfare tried to spoof them, but at close range, the missile seekers burned through the jamming. One scored a simulated hit. The Su-57 data link lit up with damage indicators, but Spectre kept flying. He was wounded but not dead. Vagrant rolled out at the top of her climb and dove back down, chasing him. The Su-57 went defensive, diving toward the mountain terrain again. But this time, the aggressor F-16s were out of position and the rest of Blue Force was converging. All Blue Force collapse on my position. We're ending this. The sky filled with aircraft. F-22s dove from high cover, F-15s swept in from the flanks, and the F-35s maintained their lock. Spectre was surrounded. Tried one last gambit, a high G turn toward a narrow canyon, hopping to split the formation. Vagrant matched his turn, her F-16 pulling 8GS. Her vision tunneled, blood draining from her head, but she held the turn. At the canyon entrance, Spectre made his mistake. He pulled too hard, too fast. His thrust-vectoring nozzles blazed, but the Su-57 airspeed bled too low. He entered the canyon slow and vulnerable. Vagrant lined up behind him, tone solid. Fox 2. The final kill. The exercise ended with Spectre's simulated ejection. His Su-57 crashed into the virtual canyon wall and his transponder switched to emergency mode. Blue Force had won. The radio was chaos, pilots congratulating each other, replaying the engagement. But Vagrant stayed quiet, watching Spectre's actual aircraft climb safely away, heading back to Nellie's. She'd beaten him, but she knew the truth. In a real war with real missiles, it would have been closer. Much closer. The debriefing that afternoon was different from the first day. There was no skepticism, no dismissive glances. Hayes opened with a comprehensive breakdown of the engagement, highlighting Vagrant's tactical decisions. Captain Kress identified the bait maneuver, repositioned Blue Force, and executed a coordinated attack that neutralized Spectre with minimal losses. This is exactly the kind of adaptive thinking we need in modern air combat. The footage played Vagrant's vertical climb into Spectre's attack, the F-35 splitting and flanking, the final canyon chase. It was textbook tactics elevated by intuition and experience. One of the F-35 pilots raised his hand. "Vagrant, how did you know the aggressor F-16s were bait?" She considered the question. "Experience. In Syria, I saw similar setups. The enemy would expose a weaker element to draw us in, then hit us from an unexpected angle. Spectre's tactics are aggressive, but they follow patterns. Once you recognize the pattern, you can counter it." Hayes nodded. "And that's the lesson for today. Technology matters. Fifth-generation fighters matter, but experience and tactical thinking still decide engagements." Torch spoke up, his voice respectful now. "Vagrant, would you be willing to run some training sessions? Help us recognize those patterns?" Vagrant glanced at Hayes, who nodded. "I'd be happy to." The room erupted in discussion, pilots comparing notes, debating tactics. Vagrant slipped out quietly, needing air. Outside, the desert heat was oppressive, but she welcomed it. It was real, tangible, unlike the simulated world of exercise scenarios. Hayes found her later, sitting on the tail of her F-16. "You know they're going to write about this," he said. "You've become the story of Red Flag 25-2. I didn't come here to be a story." "I know. But sometimes we don't get to choose. You've proven something important, Vagrant, not just to them but to every pilot who will come after you." She looked at him. "What happens next?" "Next, you finish Red Flag. Then if you're interested, I'm putting your name forward for the weapons school. Instructor cadre. We need people who can teach this kind of thinking." Vagrant blinked, surprise breaking through her usual composure. Weapons School, the Air Force's graduate-level training program for fighter pilots. Teaching there was a career pinnacle reserved for the absolute best. I'd be honored, sir," Hayes smiled. "You've earned it 10 times over." That night, Vagrant sat in her quarters, staring at the patch on her flight suit. The call sign Vagrant had been given to her years ago, a dismissive joke about her tendency to take assignments nobody else wanted. She'd worn it as armor, turning the insult into identity. But now, looking at it, she wondered if it was time for something new. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Torch standing there, awkward but determined. "Hey, I wanted to say, what I said on the first day wasn't just rude, it was wrong. You're one of the best pilots I've ever seen fly." Vagrant nodded slowly. "Thank you, that means something. Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Why do you still fly the F-16? I mean, you could probably transition to Raptors or F-35s. Why stay with an older airframe?" She smiled faintly. "Because it's not about the jet, it's about the pilot. The F-16 has been good to me, and I know how to make it do things people don't expect. That's worth more than stealth or sensor fusion." Torch nodded, understanding. "Well, if you ever want a wingman who actually respects you, I'm volunteering. I'll keep that in mind." He left, and Vagrant closed the door. She lay on her bunk, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in years, she felt something close to satisfaction. The remaining days of Red Flag passed in a blur of sorties, debriefs, and incremental improvements. Vagrant flew every mission, sometimes as tactical lead, sometimes as aggressor herself, helping Blue Force pilots understand what it felt like to face a skilled opponent. Spectre appeared sporadically, flying for Red Force or observing from the control room. He and Vagrant developed an unspoken respect, two veterans who understood the razor's edge of combat flying. On the final day, Hayes organized a heritage flight, a formation of aircraft spanning generations. An F-4 Phantom, an F-15 Eagle, an F-16 Fighting Falcon, an F-22 Raptor, and an F-35 Lightning II flying together over the Nevada desert. Vagrant flew the F-16, positioned between the legacy Phantom and the modern Raptor. It was symbolic, a bridge between eras. As the formation flew over Nellies, the crowd on the ground cheered. Families, support crews, and base personnel watched the jet streak past, their roar echoing off the mountains. Vagrant looked left, then right, seeing the other pilots through their canopies. They were all different backgrounds, different experiences, but united by the same love of flight, the same commitment to excellence. The formation broke after 10 minutes, each aircraft returning to base individually. Vagrant landed last, her F-16 touching down smoothly. As she taxied to the ramp, she saw a crowd waiting. Hayes, the other pilots, maintenance crews, even some personnel from other squadrons. She shut down the engine and climbed out, puzzled. Hayes stepped forward, holding something. "Captain Kress, on behalf of the Red Flag cadre and participating squadrons, we'd like to present you with this." He handed her a plaque. It was simple, a wooden base with a metal plate engraved with the Red Flag emblem and the words, "To Captain Myra Vagrant Kress, for excellence in tactical aviation and inspiring a generation of fighter pilots." Vagrant's throat tightened. She'd received awards before, medals, commendations, certificates, but this felt different. This wasn't from some distant command structure. This was from her peers. "Thank you," she managed. "All of you." The crowd applauded, a genuine outpouring of respect. Torch started a chant, "Vagrant, Vagrant." Others joined in. It was silly and heartfelt and perfect. That evening there was a banquet. Pilots and crew from all the participating squadrons gathered in the base's main hall. Speeches were given, stories were shared, and toasts were raised. Vagrant sat at a table with her newfound wingman, Torch, the F-35 pilots, and a few others who'd flown with her during the exercise. Spectre appeared halfway through the evening, out of uniform, wearing civilian clothes. He approached Vagrant's table. "May I join?" She gestured to an empty chair. He sat, accepting a beer from one of the other pilots. "I have flown for many years," Spectre said, "against many opponents, but you are different. You understand that air combat is not about technology, it is about mind." Vagrant raised her glass. "To the mind, then." Spectre clinked his bottle against her glass. "And to the heart, because without heart the mind hesitates. You do not hesitate." As the night wore on, the conversation turned to the future. Torch asked Vagrant about the weapons school. "Are you nervous?" She shook her head. "No. I'm ready. I've been ready for a long time. I just needed the chance." "You've earned more than a chance," Torch said. "You've earned a legacy." The word legacy stuck with Vagrant as she packed her gear the next morning. She'd never thought about her career in those terms. She'd been too focused on surviving, on proving herself mission by mission. But now, with the weapons school on the horizon and a new generation of pilots looking to her as an example, the weight of legacy settled on her shoulders. It wasn't a burden. It was a responsibility. Hayes met her on the flight line one last time. "Your orders came through. You report to Nellie's weapons school in 3 weeks. Thank you, sir, for everything." "Don't thank me. You did the work. I just made sure people noticed." Vagrant climbed into her F-16 for the flight back to her home station. As she taxied out, she saw the other pilots lined up along the taxiway, saluting. She returned the salute, her chest tight with emotion. The takeoff was smooth, the desert falling away beneath her. She climbed through a thin layer of clouds, breaking into brilliant sunlight. The sky stretched infinite and blue, the same sky she'd loved since she was a child watching jets from her backyard. Her radio crackled. "Vagrant Nellie's tower, you're cleared to exit the airspace. Safe flight." "Roger Tower, Vagrant is clear." She banked south toward home, but her mind was already ahead, thinking about the weapons school, the students she'd teach, the tactics she'd refine. She thought about the little girl who'd watch her flights, inspired the way she'd been inspired. Somewhere out there, that girl existed. Maybe she was 7 years old, staring up at contrails, dreaming of flight. Maybe she was 17, applying to the academy, nervous and hopeful. Maybe she was 27, already flying but doubting her place in a male-dominated field. Vagrant wanted that girl to know something. It was possible. It was hard, unfair, exhausting, but possible. And worth it. Below, the desert gave way to mountains, then plains. Vagrant's F-16 sliced through the air, a silver dart against the endless blue. She thought about call signs. Vagrant had served her well, but maybe it was time for something new. Something that reflected not what others thought of her, but what she'd become. She keyed her radio, broadcasting on an open frequency. "This is Captain Myra Kress, call sign Vagrant, en route to home station. To anyone listening, never let them tell you what you can't do. The sky doesn't care about their opinions. Only your skill." She released the mic and smiled. The jet flew on, steady and sure, carrying her toward whatever came next. Behind her, the desert and the mountains and Nellie's Air Force Base faded into memory. But the lessons remained. The respect she'd earned. The example she'd set. The legacy she'd begun. The 3 weeks before Vagrant reported to the weapons school passed quickly. She returned to her home station at Shaw Air Force Base, where her squadron greeted her with a small celebration. Word of her red flag performance had spread, and suddenly she was no longer just another pilot. She was the pilot who beat Spectre. The attention was strange, uncomfortable at times, but also validating. Her squadron commander pulled her aside. "We're proud of you, Myra. But I'm also losing one of my best pilots. The weapons school's gain is our loss. I'll make sure what I learn there comes back to help the squadron," she promised. She spent the time organizing her knowledge, tactics, techniques, lessons learned from dozens of combat missions. She wanted to arrive at the weapons school not just as a graduate student, but as someone ready to contribute immediately. She also spent time with her F-16, tail number 417. The maintenance chief offered to transition it to another pilot, but Vagrant requested it remain in reserve status. "She's earned a rest," Vagrant said, running her hand along the fuselage one last time. The crew chief nodded, understanding. When the day came to leave for Nellie's, Vagrant packed light: flight suits, personal items, her logbook. She looked at the logbook, its pages filled with hundreds of flights spanning 15 years. Each entry told a story: training missions, combat sorties, close calls, and victories. She turned to a blank page and wrote, "Beginning next chapter, weapons school, purpose, pass on what I've learned, ensure the next generation is ready." She closed the book and headed to the flight line. Her transport was an unassuming C-130, carrying cargo and personnel to Nellie's. She could have flown herself in an F-16, but she chose the cargo plane deliberately. It was a reminder that military aviation was bigger than individual glory. It was about the mission, the team, the cause. The flight was uneventful. Vagrant sat in the webbed seats, surrounded by crates of equipment and a handful of other passengers. She closed her eyes and thought about what she wanted to achieve at the weapons school, not just to teach tactics, but to change culture, to create an environment where skill mattered more than prejudice, where respect was earned through competence, not granted based on demographics. When the C-130 landed at Nellie's, Vagrant stepped off into the familiar desert heat. The weapons school building stood in the distance, a nondescript structure that housed some of the finest fighter pilots in the world. She walked toward it, her duffel bag over her shoulder. Inside, the administrative officer greeted her. Captain Kress. Welcome to the weapons school. Your quarters are ready and orientation begins tomorrow at 0800. Thank you. Her quarters were simple, a small room with a bed, desk, and locker. She unpacked methodically, hanging her flight suits, organizing her gear. On the desk, she placed the plaque from Red Flag, a tangible reminder of what she'd accomplished. That night, she walked the flight line, watching the jets under the stars. F-16s, F-22s, F-35s, all lined up, ready for the next day's training. She thought about the pilots who'd fly them, the mistakes they'd make, the lessons they'd learn. Tomorrow, she'd begin teaching them. But tonight, she was just another pilot, standing under the same sky that had called to her since childhood. The first day of weapons school instructor orientation was intense. Vagrant sat in a classroom with 11 other pilots, all recent graduates of the program, all selected to return as instructors. They were the best of the best, tacticians, innovators, leaders. The commandant, a stern colonel with silver hair and 3 decades of experience, addressed them. You're here because you represent the pinnacle of tactical aviation, but being a great pilot doesn't automatically make you a great teacher. Your job is to challenge your students, push them to their limits, and prepare them for the reality of combat. Not everyone will make it, that's okay. We need quality, not quantity. He paused, letting the words sink in. You'll each be assigned a class of students. You'll teach them tactics, mission planning, threat analysis, and decision-making under pressure. You'll also evaluate them constantly. If they're not meeting standards, you'll tell them. If they're not improving, you'll cut them. Clear. A chorus of "Yes, sir," echoed through the room. Vagrant felt a thrill of anticipation. This was what she'd been preparing for her entire career. Over the next few days, the new instructors received their class assignments and began reviewing student files. Vagrant's class had 12 students, 7 F-16 pilots, 3 F-15 pilots, and 2 F-22 pilots. All were senior captains or junior majors, experienced but not yet experts. She studied their records carefully. Strong performers, but each had weaknesses. One tended to overcommit in engagements. Another struggled with energy management. A third had excellent tactical sense but poor communication. Vagrant made notes, planning how she'd address each issue. The first day of actual instruction arrived. Vagrant stood at the front of the classroom, facing her 12 students. They looked at her with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. She was younger than some of them, and while her red flag performance had made headlines, not everyone was convinced. She began without preamble. I'm Captain Kress, call sign Vagrant. I'm here to teach you how to survive and win in air combat, not against training scenarios, against real adversaries who want to kill you. She clicked through a presentation showing gun camera footage from her time in Syria, close-range engagements, missile evasions, terrain masking. This is what combat looks like. It's chaotic, fast, and unforgiving. The jet doesn't matter as much as you think. The mission planning doesn't matter as much as you think. What matters is your ability to adapt when everything goes wrong. One of the F-22 pilots raised his hand. With all due respect, ma'am, my aircraft has capabilities that make a lot of those situations less relevant. Vagrant nodded. True, the Raptor is an incredible machine, but what happens when your radar gets jammed? When your data link fails? When you're forced into a visual engagement? The pilot hesitated. Then, I rely on training. Exactly, and that's what we're going to give you, training that prepares you for the worst-case scenario, because in combat, Murphy's Law is absolute. If something can go wrong, it will. She spent the rest of the session breaking down a complex engagement, showing how small decisions cascaded into victory or defeat. The students took notes furiously, asking questions, challenging assumptions. By the end, even the skeptical F-22 pilot looked engaged. After class, Vagrant walked the flight line, watching the students prepare for their first training mission. They'd be flying against aggressor aircraft, experienced pilots simulating enemy tactics. It was a humbling experience for most students. Their first few missions usually ended in simulated death. Vagrant had been there herself years ago. The first training mission was a disaster. Vagrant watched from the control room as her students flew into a carefully prepared trap. The aggressors used terrain masking and electronic warfare to split the formation, then picked off the students one by one. Within 15 minutes, all 12 were dead. In the debrief, Vagrant didn't sugarcoat it. That was unacceptable. You flew like individuals, not a team. You ignored your training and tried to be heroes. In a real war, you'd all be dead and the mission would have failed. The students sat in chastened silence. Tomorrow we'll try again, and you'll keep trying until you get it right. The second mission went better. The students communicated more, coordinated their attacks, and managed to splash 2 aggressors before being overwhelmed. Progress, but not enough. By the end of the first week, Vagrant students were exhausted and frustrated. Air combat was humbling. Every engagement exposed weaknesses, every mistake was replayed in brutal detail during debriefs, but they were learning. One evening, the skeptical F-22 pilot, Captain Reaper Dalton, approached Vagrant. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "How do you stay calm? In the engagements, the footage you showed us, you never seem rattled." "How?" Vagrant thought about it. "Because panic gets you killed. Fear is natural, but you can't let it control you. I focus on the next decision, the next maneuver. I break the chaos into manageable pieces." Reaper nodded slowly. "I keep overthinking, trying to calculate every variable. By the time I decide, it's too late." "Then stop calculating. Trust your instincts. You've trained for thousands of hours. Your brain knows what to do. Let it work." The next day, Reaper flew differently. He stopped hesitating, started reacting. He still made mistakes, but they were aggressive mistakes, not passive ones. Vagrant noted the change in her evaluation. By the 4th week, her students were becoming a cohesive unit. They anticipated each other's moves, communicated efficiently, and adapted to changing situations. They still lost more engagements than they won, but the margins were narrowing. Vagrant pushed them harder, introducing more complex scenarios, multi-axis threats, degraded communications, asymmetric fights. One scenario involved a single student facing 3 aggressors. It was designed to be unwinnable, a test of decision-making under impossible odds. Reaper volunteered. Vagrant watched as he launched, knowing he'd likely be shot down within minutes, but Reaper surprised her. He didn't try to fight. Instead, he went defensive immediately, using terrain and speed to evade. He dragged the aggressors across the range, burning their fuel, forcing mistakes. After 20 minutes, the aggressors had to break off. Winchester, bingo fuel. Reaper survived. In the debrief, Vagrant asked, "Why didn't you engage?" "Because I couldn't win," Reaper said simply, "but I could survive. And in combat, sometimes survival is victory." Vagrant smiled. "Exactly. You learned the most important lesson, knowing when not to fight." The room absorbed that. These weren't just lessons in flying. They were lessons in thinking. By the 8th week, Vagrant students were flying against Spectre. He'd returned to Nellie's for another red flag iteration and agreed to fly against the weapons school students as a final exam. It was an honor and a terror, facing the pilot who'd never lost. Vagrant briefed her students carefully. "He'll use electronic warfare, terrain masking, and aggression to overwhelm you. Your job isn't to beat him. It's to survive long enough to learn from him." The students launched 12 aircraft against Spectre's solo Su-57. Vagrant watched from the control room, heart pounding. Spectre dismantled the first 6 students in 10 minutes. His tactics were flawless. He isolated them, exploited their mistakes, and simulated kills with surgical precision. But the second wave adapted. They'd learned from watching their classmates die. Reaper led the second wave, implementing a tactic Vagrant had taught: spread formations with overlapping fields of fire. They didn't try to dogfight Spectre. Instead, they set a trap, using one aircraft as bait while the others positioned for shots. Spectre took the bait, diving on the exposed F-16. But when he committed, the other 5 aircraft converged. Spectre found himself surrounded, multiple missile locks from different angles. In a real fight, he might have escaped. But in the training scenario with simulated weapons, he was trapped. Reaper called Fox 3, simulated kill. The control room erupted in cheers. Vagrant allowed herself a small smile. Her students had beaten Spectre. Not through individual brilliance, but through teamwork and tactics. In the debrief Spectre himself attended, he looked at the students with something like pride. "You flew well, not as individuals, but as one. That is rare," Reaper spoke for the group. "We had a good teacher." Spectre's eyes found Vagrant. "Yes, you did." After the debrief, Spectre pulled Vagrant aside. "You are creating something important here. These pilots will go on to lead squadrons, shape doctrine. They will carry your lessons into the future." "That's the idea," Vagrant said. "You should be proud." "I'm just doing my job," Spectre shook his head. "No, you are doing more. You are changing the culture. When I first met you, I thought you were just skilled pilot. Now I see you are leader. That is different." Vagrant felt the weight of his words. She'd never thought of herself as a leader, just a pilot doing her best. But maybe he was right. Maybe leadership wasn't about rank or position. Maybe it was about example. The final week of the weapons school course was graduation. Vagrant students had made it through, all 12, despite the brutal attrition rate. They'd earned their patch, the coveted weapons school graduate insignia. At the ceremony, Vagrant stood with the other instructors, watching the students receive their patches. Hayes, now promoted to general, gave the keynote speech. "The graduates you see before you represent the future of air combat. They've been tested, challenged, and forged into tacticians. But none of this would be possible without dedicated instructors who give everything to ensure these pilots are ready." He looked directly at Vagrant. "Instructors like Captain Kress, who remind us that excellence has no gender, no age limit, no prerequisites except dedication and skill." The applause was thunderous. Vagrant felt her face flush, unused to such public recognition. After the ceremony, her students approached her one by one, shaking her hand, thanking her. Reaper was last. "Ma'am, I just want you to know you changed how I think about flying, about leadership. I came here thinking I was already good. You showed me I could be better." "You did the work, Reaper. I just pointed you in the right direction." "Still, thank you." As the sun set over Nellie's, Vagrant stood alone on the flight line looking at the jets. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the dismissive comments, the mockery, the doubts. And then the moment in that canyon, facing Spectre, when everything changed. She'd proven herself. But more than that, she'd opened doors for others. Months passed. Vagrant continued teaching at the weapons school, refining her curriculum, mentoring new students. Her reputation grew. Pilots requested her classes specifically, knowing they'd be challenged but also knowing they'd emerge better. One afternoon, Hayes called her into his office. "Myra, I have a proposition for you." She sat, curious. "The Air Force is standing up a new unit, an adversary tactics squadron specifically designed to train fighter pilots against near-peer threats. Advanced aircraft, experienced pilots, realistic scenarios. They want you to command it." Vagrant blinked. Command. She'd never aspired to command. Her focus had always been on flying, on the mission. "Sir, I'm honored, but I'm not sure I'm qualified." Hayes laughed. "Myra, you've beaten the best aggressor pilot in the world. You've trained a generation of weapons school graduates. You've earned respect from everyone who matters. If you're not qualified, nobody is. But I'm still a captain. Command positions usually go to majors or lieutenant colonels. We're promoting you. Effective immediately, you're Major Kress. Congratulations." The weight of it settled on her. Major, commander, leader of an entire squadron. It was overwhelming and exhilarating. "When do I start?" 2 months. You'll have time to handpick your pilots, design your training syllabus, and set the tone for the unit." Vagrant left Hayes' office in a daze. She walked to her quarters and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back was different from the one who'd arrived at Red Flag over a year ago. Older, yes, but also stronger, more confident. She thought about the little girl from years ago, watching jets from her backyard. That girl would be proud. The new squadron, designated the 65th Aggressor Squadron, was based at Nellie's, making Vagrant a permanent fixture at the base. She began the work of building it from scratch. She hand-picked pilots, looking for a mix of experience and hunger. She selected maintainers, operations staff, and intelligence personnel. She even reached out to Spectre, offering him a contract position as a guest instructor. He accepted immediately. The 65th Aggressor Squadron's first mission was to prepare a group of F-35 pilots for deployment to the Pacific. The geopolitical situation had grown tense, with potential near-peer adversaries developing advanced capabilities. These pilots needed to be ready for fights unlike anything they'd faced before. Vagrant designed a 2-week training evolution that pushed the F-35 pilots to their limits. Her squadron flew a mix of F-16s with radar enhancers to simulate stealth fighters and actual F-22s borrowed from other units. The scenarios were brutal, realistic, and unforgiving. By the end, the F-35 pilots had been humbled, educated, and sharpened into a formidable force. Their squadron commander thanked Vagrant personally. "What you've done here is invaluable. My pilots are ready for anything now." "That's the idea," Vagrant said. "Make sure they come home." As her squadron's reputation grew, requests poured in from across the Air Force. Everyone wanted their pilots trained by the 65th. Vagrant managed the workload carefully, ensuring quality over quantity. One evening, she received an unexpected visitor. A young woman in a flight suit, fresh-faced and nervous, knocked on her office door. "Ma'am, I'm Second Lieutenant Amy Torres. I just graduated from pilot training. I requested assignment to fighters and my instructor told me I should talk to you." Vagrant gestured for her to sit. "Why me?" "Because you're proof it's possible, ma'am. My whole life people told me women don't belong in fighters, but you've done more than belong, you've excelled. I want to be like you." Vagrant saw herself in Torres. The same determination, the same doubt, the same fire. Vagrant studied Lieutenant Torres carefully. The young woman's hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her posture straight despite obvious nerves. This was a pivotal moment not just for Torres but for the legacy Vagrant was building. "Let me tell you something, Lieutenant," Vagrant began. "I didn't set out to be a role model. I set out to be the best pilot I could be. Everything else, the recognition, the respect, came from consistent performance. If you want to succeed in fighters, don't focus on proving people wrong. Focus on proving yourself right." Torres nodded, absorbing every word. "What was the hardest part for you, ma'am?" Vagrant leaned back in her chair. "The loneliness. You're going to face dismissive comments, jokes, isolation. Some of it will be intentional, some won't be. But either way, it's exhausting. You'll need to find your own support system, whether that's family, friends, or fellow pilots who respect you." "How did you handle it?" "I flew better than everyone else. That's the only answer that works. Excellence is the only currency that matters in this field. Everything else is noise." Torres smiled for the first time. "I can do that." "I believe you can. Where are you hopping to get assigned?" "F-16s, ma'am. I know they're older, but there's something about them. They're pure flying. Pilot skill matters more than technology." Vagrant felt a surge of pride. This young woman understood something many experienced pilots didn't. "I'll put in a good word, but understand, requesting fighters is just the beginning. The training pipeline is brutal. Many don't make it. Are you prepared for that?" "Yes, ma'am. I didn't come this far to quit." Vagrant stood, extending her hand. "Then go show them what you're made of, Lieutenant." Torres shook her hand firmly, then left. Vagrant watched her go, feeling the weight of continuity. She wasn't just training pilots anymore. She was shaping the future of military aviation, one conversation at a time. Over the following year, the 65th Aggressor Squadron became the Air Force's premier training unit. Vagrant's tactics were studied, her methods adopted by other squadrons. She was invited to brief senior leaders at the Pentagon, to speak at conferences, to consult on tactical doctrine. But despite the accolades, she remained grounded. Every morning she arrived at the squadron early, checking on her pilots, reviewing training schedules, planning the next evolution. Every evening she stayed late, ensuring her maintainers had what they needed, that her operations staff wasn't overwhelmed. Leadership, she'd learned, wasn't about glory. It was about service. One afternoon she received a call from Torres. The young lieutenant had made it through fighter training and was being assigned to an F-16 squadron. "Ma'am, I just wanted to thank you. Your advice carried me through. I earned my wings yesterday." Vagrant smiled. "Congratulations, Lieutenant. Now the real work begins." "I know, and I'm ready." After the call, Vagrant sat alone in her office, staring at the wall covered in photographs, her squadron, her students, her aircraft. She thought about the journey from that first red flag exercise to now. She'd been mocked, underestimated, dismissed, but she'd persevered, and in doing so, she'd changed not just perceptions but reality. Women and fighters were no longer anomalies. They were operators, leaders, warriors, and that legacy would outlive any single career, any single pilot. Years passed. Vagrant, now Lieutenant Colonel Kress, continued leading the 65th Aggressor Squadron. Her hair showed streaks of gray, her flight suit bore more patches, but her skills remained razor-sharp. She still flew regularly, still challenged her pilots, still embodied the standards she demanded. The geopolitical landscape had shifted. The near-peer threats she'd trained against had become real conflicts. Her former students were deployed worldwide, using the tactics she'd taught them, surviving because of the lessons she'd drilled into them. Reports filtered back successful engagements, lives saved, missions accomplished. Each one carried a piece of her legacy. One morning, Hayes, now a 3-star general, visited the squadron. He found Vagrant in the briefing room preparing for the day's training. "Myra, walk with me." They stepped outside into the desert morning. The sun was just rising, painting the mountains gold. "I have news," Hayes said. "You're being promoted to full colonel, and with that promotion comes a new assignment." Vagrant's chest tightened. "What assignment, Wing Commander?" "You'll oversee 3 squadrons, including the 65th. It's a big job. Political, administrative, strategic. Less flying, more leadership." She'd known this was coming. Career progression in the military meant moving away from the cockpit eventually. But knowing didn't make it easier. "When?" she asked. 3 months. That gives you time to transition your successor, close out your projects." Vagrant nodded slowly. "Who's taking over the 65th? Hayes smiled. "Captain Reaper Dalton, your recommendation, if memory serves." She'd recommended Reaper 2 years ago, recognizing his growth from skeptical student to exceptional tactician. It was the right choice. "He'll do well." They walked in silence for a moment. Then Hayes spoke again. "You've built something extraordinary here, Myra. The 65th is the standard every other aggressor squadron tries to match. Your students have gone on to command squadrons, write doctrine, shape policy. That's your legacy." "It doesn't feel like enough," she admitted. "There's still so much to do, so many pilots to train, and others will continue that work. Your job now is to operate at a higher level, to shape the entire wing, to influence strategy." Vagrant understood, but it didn't ease the sense of loss. Flying had been her identity for 20 years. Giving it up felt like losing a part of herself. That night, she walked to the flight line one last time as squadron commander. Her F-16, tail number 417, had been retired years ago, replaced by newer airframes. But the spirit remained, the same commitment to excellence, the same refusal to accept mediocrity. She thought about all the pilots she'd trained, all the lives she'd touched. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands if she counted the indirect influence. They'd carry her lessons forward, teaching the next generation who would teach the one after that. Legacy wasn't about her anymore. It was about them. The promotion ceremony was held 3 months later. Vagrant stood at attention as Hayes pinned the colonel's insignia on her uniform. Her squadron, her former squadron, stood in formation, saluting. Reaper stepped forward as the new commander, accepting the squadron guidon from Hayes. It was a symbolic moment, the torch being passed. In her new role as wing commander, Vagrant faced challenges she'd never anticipated. She was responsible for 3 squadrons, over 200 personnel, and a budget that made her head spin. The administrative burden was enormous, but she approached it with the same discipline she'd applied to flying. She quickly learned that leadership at this level was less about tactics and more about strategy, less about individual performance and more about organizational culture. She implemented policies that prioritized pilot welfare, better scheduling, improved work-life balance, mental health resources. She'd seen too many talented pilots burn out, and she was determined to prevent it. She also pushed for technological upgrades, fighting through bureaucracy to secure funding for new training systems and aircraft modifications. Her reputation helped. When Lieutenant Colonel Vagrant Kress made a request, people listened. But the hardest part was the distance from flying. As wing commander, she could still fly occasionally, but her schedule rarely allowed it. She sat through budget meetings while her pilots flew sorties. She reviewed paperwork while they engaged in the kind of dynamic combat training she'd built her career on. One evening, feeling particularly restless, she signed out an F-16 and launched for a twilight flight. Alone in the cockpit, with the desert stretching below and the sky fading from blue to purple, she felt herself again. The radio was silent. No tactical frequencies, no mission objectives. Just her and the jet in the sky. She climbed to 30,000 feet and leveled off, the horizon curving gently in all directions. She thought about her career, the missions flown, the students taught, the battles won. She thought about the mockery at that first red flag exercise, how far away it seemed now. She'd proven herself 100 times over. But more importantly, she'd proven that excellence transcended demographics, that skill was the only metric that mattered. As the sun set, painting the world in shades of orange and gold, Vagrant turned back toward Nellie's. The landing was smooth, the jet settling onto the runway like it had done 1,000 times before. She taxied to the ramp, shut down the engine, and sat in the silence. This might be one of her last flights. The thought was melancholy but also peaceful. She'd given everything to aviation, and it had given her a purpose, an identity, a legacy. When she climbed out, Reaper was waiting by the crew ladder. "Heard you were up. Needed to clear your head," she nodded. "Something like that." "You know," Reaper said, "the squadron still talks about you. Every brief, every debrief, someone references something you taught us. You're still commanding, even if you're not in the seat." Vagrant smiled. "That's the best kind of command." They walked together toward the operations building, talking about the squadron's recent training, upcoming deployments, challenges, and successes. It felt good to be connected, even in a different capacity. Over the next few years, Vagrant continued rising through the ranks. She became a 1-star general, then 2-star, eventually overseeing air operations for an entire theater. Her decisions affected thousands of people, shaped strategies, influenced outcomes. But she never forgot where she came from. She made a point to visit squadrons, to talk with young pilots, to remind them that rank didn't create distance unless you let it. She attended Lieutenant Tor's promotion to captain, watching with pride as the young woman received her own command. Tor's had become everything Vagrant had hoped, a skilled pilot, a dedicated leader, a role model for the next generation. "Thank you for everything, ma'am," Tor's said after the ceremony. "You showed me it was possible. You did the work," Vagrant replied. "I just opened a door." As Vagrant approached retirement, she reflected on her career. 30 years of service, countless hours in the cockpit, hundreds of students trained, policies shaped, lives saved. The Air Force had changed dramatically since she'd started. Women in combat roles were no longer controversial. They were simply pilots evaluated on merit. The culture had shifted, not entirely, but meaningfully. She liked to think she'd played a small part in that shift. Her final assignment before retirement was at the Pentagon, working on long-term strategic planning. It was far from the cockpit, far from the thrill of flight, but it was important work. She helped design training programs, acquisition strategies, and doctrine that would guide the Air Force for decades. One afternoon, she received a letter. It was handwritten, unusual in the digital age. The return address was unfamiliar. She opened it carefully. "Dear General Kress," it began. "My name is Jessica, and I'm 12 years old. My teacher told us to write to someone we admire, and I chose you. I want to be a fighter pilot when I grow up. My dad says it's too dangerous for girls, but I showed him videos of you flying, and he changed his mind. I just wanted to say thank you for being awesome. You're my hero." Vagrant's eyes stung. She carefully folded the letter and placed it in her desk drawer, next to the plaque from Red Flag and her first set of pilot wings. This was the legacy that mattered, not the rank, not the accolades, but the inspiration. If one 12-year-old girl believed she could fly because of Vagrant's example, then everything had been worth it. Vagrant's retirement ceremony was held at Nellie's, the place where her story had transformed from personal struggle to public legacy. The hangar was packed. Current pilots, former students, family, friends, and dignitaries. Hayes, now retired himself, attended as a guest. Spectre even made an appearance, older but still carrying himself with that same quiet confidence. The commander of Air Combat Command gave a speech, recounting Vagrant's career highlights. General Crest didn't just fly aircraft. She changed how we think about fighter aviation. She proved that diversity of perspective makes us stronger, that experience and skill matter more than demographics, and that leadership is about service, not status. When Vagrant stepped to the podium, the applause was thunderous. She waited for it to fade, then spoke. 30 years ago, I walked into a briefing room and was dismissed as deadweight. It hurt, but it also motivated me. I decided that I would be so good, so undeniable, that criticism would turn to respect. She paused, looking out at the crowd. I didn't do this alone. I had mentors who believed in me when I doubted myself. I had maintainers who kept my aircraft flying. I had fellow pilots who challenged me to be better. This career was a team effort. She saw Torres in the audience, now a major and squadron commander herself. She saw Reaper commanding the 65th with the same dedication she'd brought. She saw dozens of other faces, students, colleagues, friends. To the young pilots here today, you will face challenges. Some will question whether you belong. Don't waste energy convincing them. Just fly. Just be excellent. The sky doesn't care about anyone's opinion. It only responds to skill. Her voice grew stronger. And to those who doubt others based on anything except competence, you're limiting your own potential. The best teammate, the best wingman, the best leader might not look like you expect. Give them a chance. You might be surprised. She concluded with a quote she'd always loved. The only easy day was yesterday. Keep pushing, keep improving, keep flying. The applause was deafening. After the ceremony, she walked the flight line one last time. An F-35 was being prepped for a training sortie. Its pilot, a young woman performing her walk-around. Vagrant approached. First flight in the Lightning. The pilot turned, eyes widening when she recognized Vagrant. Yes, ma'am, I'm a little nervous. Good, nerves keep you sharp. Trust your training, trust your jet, and trust yourself. Will do, ma'am. As Vagrant walked away, she heard the F-35's engine spool up, the whine building to a roar. She stopped and watched the jet taxi, then launch, climbing into the sky with a trail of heat shimmer. She stood there until the aircraft was a speck against the clouds, then disappeared entirely. The sky had called to her as a child, given her a purpose as an adult, and shaped her legacy as a leader. Now, as she walked away from the flight line for the last time, she felt not sadness but gratitude. She had flown. She had served. She had inspired. And somewhere, a 12-year-old girl named Jessica was looking up at the sky, dreaming of the day she'd climb into a cockpit and prove that she, too, belonged among the clouds. The story ended not with Vagrant's last flight, but with the promise of all the flights to come, flown by pilots she'd never meet, inspired by an example she'd set, carrying forward a legacy built on skill, determination, and the unshakable belief that the sky belongs to anyone brave enough to reach for it.